Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start this presentation by caveating it for two reasons. One, I'm presenting on behalf of my colleague, Sam Jones, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. But secondly, this is not my work area, so we'll see how this goes. But what I'm going to do today is give you an oversight into one of our programmes that we've got back in the UK, where we're mobilising the recreational angling community for water quality monitoring. And before I begin, I think it's really important context that in the UK we have a sewage scandal crisis. We have a lot of private water companies pumping sewage into our rivers, our lakes, our estuaries, so much so that there's no river in the UK that has good ecological status and none that have good chemical status. So it's a really terrible state of affairs, and obviously many recreational anglers are very passionate about water quality. So for those of you that don't know, a very quick introduction to our organisation. I work for the Angling Trust. We are a non-profit organisation representing anglers fighting for fish, fishing and the environment. We're recognised as the national governing body for recreational angling in England. And we deliver many different services to the angling community, and one of those is around community outreach, education and engagement. And our flagship campaign, Anglers Against Pollution, is really one of the things that's particularly popular with the recreational angling community. We utilise many levers through this campaign, such as political advocacy, litigation with our sister company, Fish Legal, but also on the ground citizen science increasingly. So this project, although I'm going to talk to you today about estuaries, really began in freshwater. So back in 2022, a group of recreational anglers came to us and asked us whether it would be possible to facilitate a water quality monitoring network, if we could provide them with the tools to do so, and then utilise that data from the ground up into political advocacy. So that's what we did. We hadn't done anything like this before, but through a brief period of research and trial and error, we created these water quality monitoring network testing kits that were about £200 for the angling clubs to purchase. So it wasn't a cheap investment, but many of them were willing to do so, particularly in freshwater, where in the UK they are privately owned. So most of the angling clubs own the section of the riverbed that they are monitoring. So there was a vested interest in it for that reason as well. So fast forward to today, this will work. Oh, go back. Go back again. So we've now taken, fast forward to today, and the freshwater version of the water quality monitoring network has taken over 12,000 samples across 200 rivers in the UK. It comprises 278 angling clubs with more than 400 individual members making up the network. And it's going from strength to strength each year, so our latest report will shortly be available. And I think it's important to say as well, particularly touching on some of the themes through this conference around the idea of eroding social licence, we're really seeing that in the UK. There's reduced access to angling opportunities, there's increasing political tensions around topics like animal welfare, around whether people should be recreational fishing, and this programme has really provided us with the opportunity to present recreational anglers as custodians of their environment, which has really supported the idea of social licence, and we're starting to see collaborations between groups that typically have tension between them. So for example, there's a big issue in the UK between wild swimmers, people who go on canoes, and the angling community around access, and this project has helped to bridge the gap between those three communities. So we had this successful project in the freshwater space, and our organisation works across both freshwater and marine. And I'm usually the person in meetings that goes, what about the sea? What are you going to do for those guys? So we had this idea of trialling it within UK estuaries. Every estuary in the UK is very different. Many of them are effectively impacted by the historical past, whether that's mining, different forms of industry. So there's no estuary that is the same, which can make this particularly complicated. But the other main difference between the freshwater space and the sea angling community is that sea anglers don't own the land that they're fishing on. So there's a lot less interest per se in actively monitoring their environment, and we've actually found that through this program, it's been very difficult to identify clubs to do the monitoring. So there's many reasons why we would want to monitor water quality within estuaries and coastal waters, particularly from a legislation perspective, looking at things like marine protected area water quality indicators, but also within our UK marine strategy, we have several GES, so good environmental status indicators relevant for water quality. So we really wanted to adopt this source to sea approach in doing this. I think it's going to do it again where it goes forward too many. I think this is the right slide, hopefully. So just for those of you that aren't familiar, just to give you some kind of headlines with respect to the community that we were trying to engage with through this project. There is no license for recreational sea angling in the UK. It's very limited in terms of regulation, a very disparate community, very diverse community. It's very tricky to communicate with them as one audience, and we really found that the parallels between the previous project on freshwater and this project with the sea angling community, those major differences really came into play. But that said, the recreational sea angling community is very socio-economically important in the UK. We really felt as though we had an opportunity to galvanise that community even further, and empower them to look after their local marine environment. So in terms of how this data might fit into the UK marine space, we need a greater understanding of the pollution issues in our coastal waters. That's probably not surprising to any of you. There is very limited monitoring and reporting through the statutory bodies in the UK of marine and coastal environments. And we wanted to have an initiative where sea anglers can become ambassadors for their coastal waters and empower them to drive local evidence-led campaigns. So we managed to secure a little bit of funding through something called the Fisheries and Seafood Scheme, which effectively came into force after Brexit in the UK. It was one of the funds that were created, and now that recreational angling is a named stakeholder within our legislation, we're entitled to apply for that government funding, which was a fantastic step forward. So we had a pilot project up in the Ribble Estuary, which is up in the northwest of England near Lancashire, so kind of up by Liverpool, if you're familiar with the UK. And we really wanted to just trial and test the methodology, check what the equipment was like, because to be honest with you, these kits were coming out at £1,000 per club. And that was a substantial ask for a very disparate community. Most of them don't have formalised clubs, they don't have accounts, they don't have funding. So it was an entirely different approach with respect to how they could fund this, and many of them have subsequently gone through CIC, so community interest companies, to do so. So we trained a group of anglers and non-angler volunteers in terms of how to safely sample key measures of water quality. We were looking at dissolved oxygen, dissolved inorganic nitrogen, alongside the standard parameters of temperature, salinity and pH. The volunteers were really essential in driving this. Our organisation is relatively resource poor, and we didn't have anyone full-time up in the northwest of England to be out and checking on these guys beyond the initial training day with our partners at the Institute of Fisheries Management. So it was really important to maintain that open dialogue, to have online meetings regularly to check that everything was going to plan in terms of the sampling itself. So beyond the proof of concept, the pilot in the Ribble, we were fortunate to secure some funding from the Fishmongers Charity and Esme Fairburn to continue with the national rollout for an additional year. And we launched that in June 2025, so it's still a relatively new programme for us. And we had a relatively strong uptake, not as strong as freshwater, but a strong uptake from the sea angling community, and particularly the non-angling community, to work in partnership with local clubs on 7 different estuaries routinely around the UK. And 6 months post rollout, we have that clear picture that pollution is very much a significant issue. So that wasn't a surprising outcome, but it's useful for us to have that data to support our advocacy moving forward. So in terms of the unique opportunities that this presents, looking forward, we're hoping that the network will continue to facilitate novel collaborations and community engagement opportunities with the sea angling community, particularly around education of the importance of habitat and water quality to fish populations and subsequently angling opportunities. The network also supports wider community engagement, as I've mentioned previously. So we've got lots of estuary partnerships in the UK that we're hoping to plug into through this initiative, but also to start working with those that are focused on habitat restoration. So, for example, Cornwall Wildlife Trust are very focused on seagrass restoration at the moment. And also looking at how we can pair this with other citizen science initiatives. So we're working with a small recreational angling group in the UK called the Bass Angler Sport Fishing Society, who have been running citizen science initiatives for quite some time, particularly in the Fal and Hell estuaries. So we're looking to pair those two together. So that's everything from me. You probably had quite a haphazard job of explaining estuary monitoring to you guys. So please feel free to reach out to my colleague Sam if you have any further questions.
Well done, Hannah. You now have time for a couple of questions. So she was trying to make, yeah, I could see you were trying to run away. We do have some questions. Cassie.
Yeah, so I think probably more on the freshwater side than the marine side at the moment. But certainly our data from this programme works with other NGOs in the UK. So, for example, the Rivers Trust. We've also got River Action, and we work collectively to share our data across all of our citizen science initiatives. And then we feed those up into government policy meetings. There's a lot of legislation change happening in the UK with respect to water quality, and this data is front and centre in that.
Any further questions? Okay, that's it. Thanks very much, Hannah.